If you're a high performer looking to grow and make an impact, but feeling stuck, underappreciated, and burned out at work, you're in the right place. I'm Melissa Vining, and this is the Job Search for High Performing Misfits podcast. I help high performers leave draining jobs behind, reclaim their careers, and land roles in organizations where they can thrive. Tune in for tips, insights, and inspiration for your journey to fulfilling work that fits you. Welcome back to Job Search for High Performing Misfits. Today I am joined by Anna Findlay, who is a career coach who helps introverted and neurodivergent women move from stuck, underpaid, and overlooked to thriving in 200K careers that actually light them up. Through her 90-day coaching program, Anna teaches a reputable system to leverage your strengths, position yourself powerfully, access the hidden job market, and build a career that works for your brain and your life. And Anna, I am very happy to talk to you today because this is a system that you built based on your personal experience, right?
Yes, based on my personal failure, probably is the best way to describe that.
Yeah, and I think that's so relatable to so many people. So do you want to tell us a little bit more about your background, a little bit more about you?
Sure. So I like to say I'm a recovered corporate failure. So I think, a pretty classic story, really, for undiagnosed neurodivergent woman. I was a gifted kid. So I went through school being told, you've got so much potential, you're so smart, and I, got a little bit of a big head about it, like, oh, yes, I'm so smart. And then I got out to corporate and, to put it really bluntly, nobody gave a shit how smart I was. And it really didn't translate. And I was super confused because I'd gone through this whole schooling system, come out with very good grades. I knew the rules for what worked in that environment. There was a set of correct answers. You either knew them or you didn't, basically. And then you get out into corporate and none of those rules translated. And I was really, really stuck. And I was getting into these roles that were very, very easy. And I was finding elements of them really easy that other people seemed to find hard. I was finding elements of them really hard that other people seemed to find easy. And I couldn't really progress. And I wasn't moving up internally. And I wasn't getting the roles I was applying for that I thought I could do well. And so I was just really frustrated. And I was like, it should be different. It should be fair. It should be based on who's the best for the job. And then I realized that it probably didn't really matter how it should be. And I could spend a lot of energy going into oh, it's so unfair. Or I could be like, okay, actually, I'm missing something. What is it that I'm missing? And so I did what any good nerd would do. And I went and researched it. And I spent probably thousands of hours, talked to a whole bunch of people, talked to people who had the careers that I wanted, talked to people who were in recruitment, talked to people who had, moved up in the fields I was interested in, studied different types of behavioral economics and human sciences and figured out what I was missing, started sort of experimenting and figuring out what works for me. And then everything started shifting very, very quickly. So within a year, I think I went from the 60K role where I did sort of stuck at that level in those types of roles for a decade to landing a 100K role that I didn't actually even apply for. And then within the next 5 years, I scaled it exponentially and I was earning over 200K, but also doing the work that I loved. And I finally felt like I'd reached my potential, which was the thing that I was most frustrated about. I was like, I know I can do more than this. I know I can. And then obviously people started to notice and they were like, how the heck did you do that? Because I'm still very much a socially awkward introvert. I'm a little bit odd. And so they're like, how did you manage to do that? And so I started teaching people how I did it. And I realized that actually the system works for a lot of people, not just me. And so that was actually how I got into career coaching.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think that's so relatable for people. So when you're saying, you're an introverted, socially awkward, neurodivergent person, how do you think those things played into your early career experience when you were having those struggles, especially with that big change from coming out of school that you mentioned and then ending up in corporate and seeing, oh my gosh, this is completely, not as maybe you expected?
Yeah, I think it played out for me as it has my entire life, right? There's a set of rules and guidelines that everyone gets a copy of somehow. I don't know, they seem to be telepathically transmitted, and I never get a copy.
Yeah.
So it's just a really big example of that.
Yeah.
So there was all these, rules, expectations. There was this inbuilt hierarchy that was never really mentioned because here in Australia, they pretend in corporates that it's not hierarchical, although it is, which is annoying. So yeah, the difference in what people were saying versus how it actually worked, the difference in being competent and delivering good results versus being visible and explaining the business impact, All of those kind of unspoken rules were a problem. And then I think the other thing that I hadn't clocked at the time was that because I'm neurodivergent, I am terrible at a bunch of stuff and awesome at a bunch of stuff. It's like one or the other.
Yeah.
Like I'm either like the worst possible version of that thing that you like can't actually imagine an adult being that bad at it, or I'm like on it, like I'm good. And so for me, I had spent a lot of time because I obviously as a neurodivergent person, you get all this feedback of like, oh, you're kind of shit at that and you should be better. So I was spending a lot of time working on those kind of weaknesses when what I actually needed to do was double down on my strengths.
Yeah.
So once I aligned my career to my strengths, as well as understood all those rules, because that was necessary, then it was like, okay, cool, she's got it. And suddenly it was like, oh, this is the things that she can do, which other people can't. And I think I also hadn't realized how difficult the things that I am really good at that are easy for me can be for other people, and therefore how valuable that skill set can be on the market.
Yeah, and that's such an interesting thing about strengths in general. And I think this applies not only to neurodivergent strengths, but everyone else's strengths too, where you end up thinking that it's so easy. How can it possibly be a strength? But that's exactly why it's your strength, right? It's easy for you. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's easy for other people. So, in your experience, how did you identify those things? What was helpful in starting to figure out, oh, these are actually the things that I really excel at? Or was it obvious to you from the beginning?
Some of it was obvious. Like I always knew I was pretty good at like knowing what was going to happen in the future. Like I could see, so that's like strategic thinking, foresight, connecting the dots, like so that sort of naturally gravitated towards like research and like big picture mapping kind of strategy stuff. So that was easy. But I think ease is a really big one. So if it's easy for you, that's a clue.
Yeah.
If it's easy and also energizing, then that's a compass.
Yeah.
Like, okay, easy and energizing. And then the final piece is it's easy for you, energizing for you, and valued by other people because it's hard for them and there are industries that pay well for it.
Yes.
So that's kind of those three things is where you're trying to aim for the intersection. So there's an element of self-reflection in there and figuring that out and doing some energy mapping and like doing some strengths testing and, you know, testing out, figuring out the things that people keep coming to you for as well. Like what do people keep coming to you for? And then there's an element of understanding the external market. I mean, okay, who actually pays for these skills? Which of my skills are the ones that I can leverage to actually get a really good paid job? And which industries are that? Which role types are that? So that was kind of the process I went through. And it wasn't super easy, but I did get there. And now I've got a process that I can take other people through that I would say it's a lot easier for them. So I would like to say that I suffered so that they don't have to.
Yes. Yes. I feel the same way a lot of the time. And I think you said two things that are so important there. One is the fact that it's not only easy, but you like to do it, because I think as neurodivergent people, especially, as you said, like either the thing is really easy or it's really like, how is it that this is so hard for me? But a lot of the times those really easy things might not necessarily be what we want to be doing. I mean, I think for me, I had a job at one point that was mostly data entry and I could do it like 5 times faster and more accurately than anyone else. But I did not want to do that because that was so boring to me. So that match between this is the thing that I am good at, but also that I'm interested in, which I think is even more important a lot of the times for neurodivergent people. Do you find that with your clients?
So I think like there's this element of work-life balance that neurotypical brains, for them, it means I don't spend too much time and effort at work where I can't apply it to the rest of my, life. But I feel like for neurodivergent people, even if we're only spending, let's say, 40 hours a week, and we've got great boundaries around that, how we spend those 40 hours will significantly impact our battery, for lack of a better way of describing it. So you can end up incredibly burnt out, even in jobs where there's really no pressure and there's no time that's getting, taken into your personal life. And on the surface, there'd be no reason to be burnt out. And it's that energy misalignment.
Yeah.
So I think that's why it's more important for us.
Yeah.
Because it seems like neurotypicals can function doing stuff they don't really like without it drastically impacting their energy levels in the rest of their life.
Yeah.
Whereas we really can't, and we should stop kidding ourselves that we can.
Yes. Yes, I will never understand that it's one of those neurotypical things where I'm like, I can't I can't put myself in that position.
It's just very draining.
Yeah.
And I mean that almost like from a soul level. Like it'll just like suck the life out of you.
Yeah.
which is no way to live. So we need to live what I call work-life alignment, which is our version of work-life balance. Don't get me wrong, it's still not a great idea to be working 80-hour work weeks. But yeah, work-life alignment for us is our version of work-life balance, in my experience with my clients and myself.
Yeah, I love that concept because when I think of, defining that for myself, and maybe you can tell us a little bit more about how you define it, but I think of the fact that my work really does energize me because I'm so interested in what I'm doing and it's engaging to me. And so even when maybe I end up working more or longer, or I come back to it at night or on the weekend or whatever, it's actually giving me something. It's giving me that energy. Would you define it in a similar way, or is there anything else that comes to mind for you?
I think it's a similar thing, right? So like, yeah, I think like there's even some people I work with who have, let's call it like they consider it like easy jobs. They're not easy jobs, but they're easy for them. If
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like they've either been in it for a while, or maybe the workload is not as significant as it has been at previous roles. And they're really confused about why they're feeling burnt out when they're doing less and the work is easy. And it's exactly what you said. They're not getting any energy from it. It's draining their energy. So even though on the surface that looks like a job that shouldn't be burning them out, it is.
Yeah.
So when you figure out what your brain naturally does well, that will be your unfair advantage. And also where you want to apply that, like where that energizes you, you will be automatically, like even if you've never worked a day in that job in your life, you will automatically be in like the top 1% immediately. Like that's just how our brains work. So like for me, for example, when I moved into strategic design, I'd never worked as a strategic designer before. I was able to get my first role. I'd done some volunteering before that to like get the experience. I'd also had a chat to our head of marketing in the role that I was in and done some work with her to get more experience. So I'd built this kind of proof portfolio, which you need to do when you're making a pivot. And I moved into my first strategic design role ever. Was promoted within 6 months.
Wow.
Like, and then promoted again 6 months later, because like we're just gonna, once you hook into that unfair advantage as a neurodivergent person, especially if you understand the rest of the rules of corporate, which are necessary, because if you're buggering up the framing and the politics, then you're probably going to stall, even if you're in an amazing environment. But if you've got that covered, once you're in your unfair advantage, there is no stopping you. Like you are going to be an absolute badass at that thing. And so that's what I'm talking about when I talk about your unfair advantage. So I unlocked mine through that process. And then also, again, like lent into it more as I went over. So that's what I'm talking about when I say your unfair advantage. So from an internal perspective, you need to know what it is, how it applies, where you create value. From an external perspective, you need to know, okay, what are the skills that they value? What's the proof? So we often have the skills, but not the proof. So, okay, how do I either reframe my background so that you understand it, so you see there is proof, or how do I build additional proof if necessary so that you can see it? Because once I'm in there, you'll see it. Yeah. So it's a matter of just like, how do we convince them before I get in?
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
Does that answer your question?
It does. So when you look at that, I think that there's almost two things that could happen, right? You could be really well aligned with that thing and your unfair advantage strengths, but the environment itself might not be the best fit for you. And in that case, it becomes challenging. Or if the environment is a good fit, then obviously you can become really successful very quickly. So how do you address the environment piece with clients?
I think there's a few things in that. It's what does their environment value as a general either industry or space? And then there's also manager relationship. Manager relationship is so important.
Yeah.
Like if your manager sees your value, you're good. That's like the main thing that you need. If their manager sees it as well, even better. But like if your manager can't see your value, because people have these kind of inbuilt systems of things that they think value looks like, right? And as a neurodivergent person, because we're so kind of extreme and polarizing a lot of the time with our skill sets, like for example, with me, I am going to go in, I'm going to understand the problem, I'm going to look at the systemic issues, and then I'm going to seek a long-term solution that's going to work, forecasting out to the future.
Yeah.
If you're the type of person that values people who come in with a hero move and make snap decisions, like you're not going to value my skill set.
Yeah.
That doesn't look like value to you. You're like overanalyzing, overthinking, way too complicated, didn't need to go to all that effort where you could have just done X. And I'm like, okay, but X is going to take like 3 weeks into the future, and then you're going to have problems Y, Z. Like,
Yeah.
there'll be so much more things you've got to address then. But they want to do it that way, partly because they can't see what I can see, but
Yeah.
also just they have different value. And also in some environments, that's better, right? Like, there are certain environments that you absolutely shouldn't put like a slowish strategic thinker like me, like, being a paramedic, for example. That's not the right environment. I was talking to a head nurse, and my role was obviously to go visit people on site, and she was a head nurse, and I was in the hospital, and we went out for, I think, brunch or something, and I was trying to order a drink, and I couldn't decide what I wanted, and she's like, I would never hire you because you are too slow to make a decision. And at the time I was really offended, and then I was like, actually, you're right. Like, not that I was going for a nurse role, but my brain that wants to take 3 minutes to decide if I want the tropical smoothie is definitely not the right brain for an emergency nurse ward, but it might be the right brain for like a cancer diagnostic ward, for example, where you take a little bit longer and you look at things a little bit more holistically.
Yeah.
I've completely lost the plot of the question now. Sorry, what was I answering?
I don't know, but it was so interesting because I like think I have very similar strengths to you, and I'm always going in and trying to figure out what we can do better, what's going wrong here. Let's create a system so that this doesn't happen again. And I have had the same experience, and especially in my early career, where people are like, but we always do it this way. Like, why would we want to do it a different way, right? And that just drives me so crazy because I can't operate like that. I literally just can't. So yeah, I think part of this is really just understanding what are those strengths and what is it that you're going to show up and do no matter what.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. It's that thing that you always do, regardless if anyone asked you. A lot of the time when people didn't want you to do it and they were like, what are you doing? Stop this, like what you just said.
Yep.
But there's something that you always do. For some people, they create communities. And I've got a friend who's like that. And wherever she goes, she creates a community. That's her thing. They just pop up around her. They like spawn out of the ground. And I'm like, how are you doing that? She doesn't know how she's doing it. So you have to kind of, get into that. What is that thing? For me, I always end up telling people what to do. So like that's part of my role in life, apparently, is to advise others based on like my experiences. And I love collecting information. It's a fun thing that I do, but I also love applying the information. I love strategy. I love understanding the problem. I love asking a bunch of questions, which is incredibly triggering for some neurotypicals. So there's also that.
Oh yeah.
I want to deeply understand what's going on here, so that I can solve it in the most complete way.
Yep, me too.
Not just a Band-Aid solution.
Yep.
So I'm going to do that no matter where you put me. So I need to put myself somewhere where the manager, the environment, and the organization, the industry, the role is going to value those skills and pay me well for them.
Yeah.
Instead of is going to find that really annoying and tell me to get back in my lane.
Yeah.
Because I'm going to do it either way. So I may as well get paid for it.
Right. Yeah. And I do the same thing. And the thing that I realized is that I'm asking the questions that most people don't know the answer to. And that's, I think, why they're so uncomfortable, right?
Yeah. So questions in neurotypical culture, which I didn't know, but I know now, post-diagnosis, can mean a lot of different things. For me, they mean I would like this piece of information.
Yeah.
That's what they mean.
Yeah.
But for them, they can mean I'm challenging your authority.
Right.
I want to make you look stupid.
Yeah.
It's like all sorts of different things that I would never even have thought to think about, because I was just like, I literally just want this piece of information. And also, if you don't know, that's fine.
Yeah.
What are we going to do about that? Do we need to know? Is there an impact of us not knowing? Is there a risk?
Yeah.
Should we maybe ask someone?
Yeah.
Like, have we considered the impact of this giant gaping hole in your plan?
Right.
And again, like, I don't judge you for that. I've had plans with gaping holes. And if you asked me this question, I'd be like, shit, you're right.
Yeah.
But that's not how it plays out. So again, having that knowledge is helpful. And that's also where it becomes important to have a manager or a company that values things like that, values asking questions, values wanting to do it in a better way, but also becomes important framing, knowing when's the right time to ask that question, when's the right environment to ask that question, how to ask that question so people don't get shitty at you and you don't create this kind of hostile working environment for yourself, because people falsely assume that you're actually there to take them down a notch when all you really wanted to know was, hi, is this actually going to work?
Right. Yeah.
So two things that you need there, the alignment and then also the skill set.
Right. Yeah. It's part you and part them. And I think that is really important for people to recognize too. How do you find a manager? Like if you're maybe in the interview process, how might you identify that manager that is going to align with that?
Well, I think a few things. So if you found the right type of role, environment, industry, it's going to become a lot easier. So when I moved into human-centered design, suddenly there were people around me who thought like me all the time, and I was no longer kind of the weird one and like odd man out. So that helps. But even within that environment, obviously there are managers that are better fitted. So I would say when we turn the interview into a conversation and we start asking them questions, and asked them about, like, what does top performance look like? What are the key priorities that you have? I asked them about specific examples, like, tell me about someone you promoted recently. You'll start to understand what they value. That's what you're looking for. Does that person they promoted sound like me? Why did they promote them? What was the skills that they valued? What do they think high performance looked like? And if they start talking about things and you're like, I have none of those traits, that could be potentially a red flag. And then also something that I used to do, when I got a job offer, which is a bit ballsy of me, but I would ask to speak to the team before I started and before I signed. And I would sit down with a handful of them and ask about not just the manager, but ask about what's the company like, what does it actually look like the other day, what are you working on at the moment, you know, I wouldn't say what is the culture like, but yeah, I would ask questions about that. And I would also ask questions about the management style of that person. I would ask them questions in the interview as well. And then when I onboarded, I would have a process that I would walk my manager through of like, okay, this is how I like to work. How do you like to work? Like, what's your communication style? I didn't tell them about my neurodivergence because some people have a bias against that. That was my personal decision. But I would talk about, I'm an introvert and I'm this and I'm that. And this is how I like to work. And this is how I block my time. And this is what you can expect from me. Like, what can I expect from you? What do you need from me? So we'd have those initial conversations, which you usually don't have. And I find like getting ahead of that is also really valuable.
Yeah.
And if they don't want to have those conversations, again, that's another massive red flag.
Yes. Yeah. And I think something that you touched on in there was that you're asking for what you need without necessarily telling them, I need it because I'm autistic or ADHD or whatever. And from what I can tell from having these conversations with a lot of people now is that that's kind of the trend that we're going towards. And I think that it's partially because that piece of information is more important, right? It's more important for you to say, this is what I actually need to be successful, and then to be able to communicate that versus a huge term like I'm autistic. I mean, that can mean so many different things. And so, as you said, there's biases in certain ways, but also it just shows up so differently for every person that we can't even really get much useful information just from that. So I really think that that is a great approach to be able to go in and be like, okay, this is how I work. How do you work? Let's align this. And of course, when you're doing that, especially like with someone else, for example, your manager, or even with a team, it makes everyone work better and everything is positive.
Yeah, 100%. And I've set up multiple teams across my career, and I've become known for setting up teams now because I've got this toolkit that I had to create for myself.
Yeah.
But yes, I think you touched on something interesting. Like, it is because it's more useful. The fact that you don't have to disclose, my personal experience is that it's risky to disclose. You have to have a lot of trust in the people around you and have built like trusted relationships to disclose, in my experience. I know that's not everyone's experience, and I love that for them. But I also think it's super important to have reasons up your sleeve. Neurotypicals love a reason. So some of the reasons that I give them, I'm like, oh, I have to go home. I'm like feeling overstimulated because I'm a Virgo. And they're like, oh yeah, go organize, like you little Virgo, like they love star signs. I also use a lot of like, it's totally acceptable to be a Virgo who's overstimulated. So star signs are one. I also used a lot of agile terminology because where I worked, they used agile ways of working. So I would talk about ways of working when I was, doing my setup conversations, and I would talk about stand-ups, and I would use their language. So they're like, oh yes, this is a ways of working conversation. And like, this is, these are normal things that we do. And of course, we're doing this because we need to be agile.
Yeah.
And so like I would borrow language from things that I thought they would think was more acceptable than because I'm autistic. That was my choice. And I find that kept me safe.
Yeah.
I would sometimes strategically disclose to different people that I was working closely with once we'd built trust. But I found that has kept me safe. Whereas I've spoken to a lot of people who have disclosed where they thought they were safe, and it turns out they weren't.
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, as per the theme of this conversation, I don't think that's the correct way that the system should be set up. I don't think that we shouldn't be able to. But sometimes it's helpful to know that that risk is there.
Yeah.
And there might be another way to get what you need while mitigating that risk.
Right. And I think that approach is brilliant because you're using kind of universal language in those cases, right? So if you're on an agile team, you're using that language that everyone understands, and you don't have to kind of start from the beginning on being like, okay, this is what it means to be autistic. This is how it affects me. And like all of that background that it's totally new to someone else. You're just approaching it as like, hey, we have this common language already.
And also, like, agile teams in tech, half of them are neurodivergent anyway,
Yeah.
whether they know that or not.
Right.
Uh, so, yeah, again, once you've got the environmental alignment, that helps.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if this approach would have worked if I'd gone into, incredibly neurotypical sales teams in real estate or something.
Right.
They'd probably be like, who are you? What are you doing? I don't know. I haven't worked in them. Maybe they'd have been like, yeah, this is awesome. But, like, that alignment piece is super helpful.
Right. Yeah. So I also wanted to talk to you a little bit more about how you help people find their fit, like find a good environment for them, or even when they're initially doing that research, let's say they really don't know where to start. How do you recommend they get started to figure out this could be maybe the place for me, and then digging deeper into it?
This is a process I've honed over time, and there's no silver bullet, unfortunately. So, yes, it does take some time. So, I would start with making an inventory of your skills. So, what have you done? And also, how did you do it? Very important. So, like, for example, I was working in account management at one point, and I was going around. My job was technically sales, which is a terrible job for me. And my job was to keep the customers happy that we had. So I was like, okay, cool. That's like a sales role, right? So if I was misguided, I might go find a sales role and be like, I'm great at sales. All my customers are happy. But what I was actually doing, I was going around visiting them on site. I was figuring out what wasn't working and what the impact of the systems and the things that were happening at our head office company was having on them, talking to them. And then I was going back to head office and being like, I've been to 60 sites. This is a problem that they're having with this online ordering system. This is a problem that they're having with the stock outages. This is a problem. And I would go back to the back end and go, okay, why is this happening? What does this look like in our system? How do we overcome that? And that has a name that's called a contextual inquiry, which is one of the research techniques in the field that I ended up going into.
Interesting.
But I didn't know that at the time. So I hooked onto that. And I'm like, I'm doing this thing where I'm fixing stuff so that people are happy, which is not sales. It was keeping my clients, but it's probably not most valued in sales, because in sales, they value relationships and they value this kind of different energy. And that wasn't really what I was supposed to be doing. It was what I was doing. It worked, but there's other places that pay a lot better for that skill set, that value it a lot more, that will understand it a lot easier, rather than trying to explain to salespeople that, yes, I'm good at keeping customers, but it's not because of my relational skills as much as because I make things work and they're happy with that.
Yeah.
I overcome the problems that they have. I've gone on a tangent now, so let me try and get back to the question. So figuring out what was your skill set, what were you doing, how were you doing it, which parts energized you, and which parts other people find hard and they don't see. Because that's an initial clue. Like, because other people weren't doing that. And for me, that was the obvious thing to be doing. If it feels obvious to you and invisible to other people, that's a clue.
Yeah.
So that's the back end part. So once you've got the back end part done, you should end up with a list of your skills, your sort of natural brain wiring is what I call it. So me, I go in, I'm like, what's not working? How do I fix it?
Yeah.
I will do that anywhere. I can't help it. So that's something I do in coaching and everything. And so that's my natural brain wiring, is like, okay, where's the actual problem here? Like, let me diagnose it. So you look at your natural brain wiring, you look at your strengths, and then you go, okay, cool. There's two options from this part. So you can either go, where can I immediately apply that already and make like a mini pivot? Or you can take more of a blue sky approach and go, okay, if I could go back to the chalkboard, like, for example, I could have been maybe a diagnostician. Did I want to go back to med school? No. So I took the other approach, which most of my clients take, where you go, okay, where have I got enough proof where I could take like maybe 1 or 2 courses, maybe do a couple of volunteer projects, maybe even not. A lot of my clients are able to actually kind of reframe and then start that. So at the moment, we use a lot of like ChatGPT as a starting point. We get some potential role titles. You go research them, look at what they actually look like, map them against future of work skills. That's super important for obvious reasons. And then conversations. Conversations are the part that everyone avoids, but everyone gets the most value from.
Yeah.
The sooner you start having conversations, the sooner it will become clear whether or not that's a role or industry that you might be interested in. You can avoid the conversations and you will avoid progress. And I say this as a socially awkward introvert who avoids talking to people as well. Like, you just have to have the conversations. If there's one thing you can take away from this podcast episode, start having some conversations. It'll help way more than you think.
Definitely. The other point that I thought you made that was so important for people to hear was the fact that we not only want it to be aligned with our strengths and our interests, but the market. And I think that's where sometimes we can fall into a trap as well, because we're like, okay, I love this thing, I'm going to go do it. And that was true for me because I started out as a musician and a music teacher. And I'm not sure how it is in Australia, but here in the US, that's very undervalued, unfortunately, and just really hard to make a living in that space. So the fact that I wasn't really able to make the big impact that I wanted to make also really negatively affected me. Do you have any tips for how people can do some of that research in advance to figure out if this is something the market really needs?
Yeah, so that's such a great point, and I think it's a really common experience that people have. So unfortunately, most of society has already got these sort of buckets of skills, and they tend to be quite sexist and racist when you explore them. So, for example, nursing is going to be underpaid, being a doctor is going to be better paid. Basically, if, women do it, it's not valuable. And if it's art, it's not valuable. And if it's maths and it's accounting and it's engineering, then it's valuable. Anyway, it's a whole bunch of BS, but that is the situation. Again, like, you can get annoyed at it, which I definitely am. Or you can or you can accept it, which I also try to do, and go, okay, cool. How do I actually position myself on the market, given that it values what it values and that I'm unlikely to be able to change that? So then it's sort of like, which part of the things that I enjoy become part of almost like a hobby and which part become like income funding. And you've got a choice to make at this point, right? So you can go explore the thing that you love and do that day in, day out and earn less money. In our capitalistic system, I think women need to have money because money is power, money is freedom, money is choices. Life is getting more expensive. So for me, it's a priority to have a role that I can capitalize on in terms of maximizing my income. It's not a priority for everyone, but if it is a priority for you, then definitely do that research. And I think there's a bunch of ways you can do it, but the way that I found most effective outside of, your desktop kind of research, looking at like future of work skills, where do they like, Googling, where do you use strategy, like who pays for this, would be having conversations. So once you've kind of identified some potential roles that you think would be, I might be able to do that well, maybe like I start small, like I took like, for example, when I moved into strategic design, I took like a half-day course. Then I was like, oh yeah, like this looks about right. So then I took like a slightly longer course and I was like, okay. And what I didn't do at that time, which I should have done, is had conversations with people who already had that role.
Yeah.
Fortunately for me, I'd picked one that I could do in person, but it doesn't always work out that way. So definitely, yeah, hit up people, have what I call informational interviews, and understand like what actually it looks like day to day. Because the work that I did, for example, strategy, when you're learning about it, it sounds very like idealistic. When you get into the actual role, like 50% of your job is getting the people who hired you to make smart decisions to actually listen to you. And so you have to like, and I developed all these systems of doing that. Unfortunately, I'm a massive behavioral science nerd, right? So I had understood how to do those influence pieces, but like that wasn't talked about the whole time, pretty much, when you're learning the theory. So I'm like, that's a useful piece of information that you would need before you go into that role. So definitely have those conversations. Ask them about the day to day. Start with a small course. Start with a small, like, volunteer project. Start something little, test, experiment, get more data, and then learn and move forward from that. So I would think about it like that when I'm trying to apply my skill set. And also I would say you don't have to get it like 100% right the first time. So you can get into a field, which I did, and then you can go, okay, which are the parts of this field that I love the most? What is the pivot where I can use more of that and less of the parts that are less energizing to me? Maybe that's a different industry. Maybe that's a slightly different role within a similar field. And that was sort of just the thread that I kept pulling to get more into what I actually wanted to be doing.
Yeah, I love that approach because you're actually taking action, which I think is where sometimes we can also get stuck. And I see this is true of a lot of job seekers, but I think it's especially challenging for neurodivergence because we can tend to overanalyze things and kind of just be like, I don't know, is this going to be the right thing? Maybe I should research it more. And then we never end up doing something that actually gives us the feedback to tell us if it's right. So I love all the suggestions about taking the course and talking to people and even doing the job and just like, see, yeah, maybe this is right. Maybe a piece of it is right. And I can take that to the next step.
Each experiment gives you more data, right? So I probably wouldn't start doing the job unless someone's offering you one, and then you're like, okay, cool, let's give it a go. But yeah, start small, build more confidence. You're never going to be 100% confident. I think about 80% is probably the aim. And also, as I like to tell my clients, readiness is a decision, not a feeling.
Yeah.
So just decide you're ready at 80%. It will feel uncomfortable. It will really feel uncomfortable. But if you do that enough times, then you're like, oh, okay, it's worked out. It's given me like the data, the progression, because you're totally right. Like you can stay researching stuff online behind your computer. It feels productive. It's not productive after a point. And the point is way sooner than you probably thought.
Yes. Yes.
So we need to get out of that and move into some other form of action, usually dealing with another human at some point as well.
Right.
Which is the part people put off because it's scary.
It is scary. And it is, I think, becoming more and more important as we see technology coming more and more into the picture. Do you have any advice? I mean, we can kind of probably go on a huge tangent about networking, but what is your approach to helping your clients with this? Because this can be, it really needs, I think, a lot of mindset shifts in order for someone to go into it and be like, okay, I'm going to do it.
So I think the biggest mindset shift for me with networking, firstly, I was terrified of it and I assumed I was bad at it because I would go to networking events. I can't work a room because, I'm neurodivergent, I'm autistic, I'm awkward. I didn't know what I was supposed to be talking about. There was no guideline, there was no structure. I was like, this is weird. People would like use a lot of flattery and I was like, I can kind of see through that that's sort of fake. Oh, this whole thing's icky. And you're kind of there to get a job. You're not allowed to mention you're looking for a job because that's like against the rules. Anyway, so I'm like, this whole thing is awkward and I'm bad at it. So I've developed a system that helps neurodivergent people network without feeling like they need to take a shower. So the way that I do it is I don't usually go to networking events because it's not my space to shine. So I thought about, okay, where am I naturally kind of going to be impressive? Anyway, where do I feel most comfortable? For me, that was like environments where I'm learning something and one-on-one conversations. So I was like, okay, cool. Those are my networking environments. So I did a lot of my networking when I was doing my first career change through the courses that I did, because I'm a huge nerd and I'm always able to help people and so there's naturally things to talk about. So that was part of the networking, but the networking I use most for my clients is usually through LinkedIn. I love LinkedIn. I think it's like this great equalizer where you can just reach out to anyone. And so we target people who are either in roles that you want or companies that you want to work for who are upfront about it. So we'll message them and say, hey, when I was researching this company, your profile came up. I see that you've been working with them for X amount of years, or you've changed industries recently, or you've, something that's really impressive. Like, I'd love to ask you 3 to 5 questions about your experience because I'm looking for my dream job this year. So it's true, right? Like it's 100% true and it's upfront and it's specific and it's not let's grab coffee. And it's like, and they can choose in that moment whether they want to engage or not. And so we do that. And also there's a part of this as well that's getting comfortable with having people not get back to you. So I say like probably for every 10 of those you send, you'll get 1 or 2 responses. People don't know their time. They could be busy. They might not be checking their LinkedIn. They might be an asshole. We don't know. We don't really care. What we want to focus on is the people that do get back to us. And if we send enough messages, obviously to people that we actually want to speak to, that we're actually enthusiastic about hearing about their story or the company that they work for, they will get back to us and then we can have those conversations. And when you're having it through that lens, it becomes a lot less awkward because you know what you're talking about. They know what you're talking about. Nobody's under any like false pretenses of why you're having the conversation. And they get more comfortable with what you're asking for as well, because, you're going to ask for 3 to 5 questions. You're not going to awkwardly pitch yourself, or you're not going to, they know what you want. So they're more likely to give it to you.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the idea of figuring out where is your place to shine is a really good strategy because for someone, maybe it is at the networking event, right? And then, yeah, go for it. And for others, you're finding these other places where you can more naturally and authentically connect with people and build those relationships. And I think a lot of what you were talking about just now leans into the authenticity. How do you find that that's important in the job search process or in the workplace? Like, what are your thoughts on authenticity?
Authenticity is an interesting one because I think it means something different to neurodivergent people and neurotypical people.
Yeah.
So I had previously thought that authenticity meant being 100% completely honest about everything and upfront about everything. And corporate doesn't really operate that way. So you're supposed to know that you pick and choose pieces of information to divulge at different times to different people so that they can develop the opinion that you wanted them to develop about the thing. I call this concept framing. So learning how to frame things is an important skill. So we definitely work on that. And when you start doing that as a neurodivergent person, it can feel like lying. It's not lying, and it is the expectation of the situation that everyone else is doing that you're expected to do that you'll be punished if you don't do. So we learn how to frame. That's important. And we learn how to think about that. But also authenticity is important when it comes to things like culture fit. So you want to be coming in to an extent yourself. You do the framing thing because that is an important skill to learn. It's almost like storytelling or like public speaking. Like it's a skill, not a personality shift. But then you also want to come in as yourself. Like I am a strange, socially awkward person who makes inappropriate jokes. If that's not what you want in your company, then you don't want me there. And it would be weird if I was there, and it's only probably going to end up blowing up in my face. So there's an element of authenticity that's super important when you're looking at exploring culture fit, especially with your manager or the person you're reporting into. That's the most important culture fit relationship for neurodivergent people. But there's also an element of learning the rules and the social rules and the framing, which will initially come across as an assault on your authenticity, but I have learned to view it differently over time.
Yeah.
So does that answer the question?
Yes. Yeah. I think that's so valuable because a lot of the times people, I think, feel like they need to almost hide who they are, especially when they're going through the job search process and interviewing. And the focus becomes so much on what is it that they want to hear? Let me tell them that. And really, when you don't also incorporate you get into those situations where then it's a mismatch and you're going to struggle almost immediately, probably in the environment because you weren't necessarily bringing that authenticity to the conversation at the beginning.
Yeah, I think there's a balance to be struck there around bringing enough of yourself that they know who they're getting, and then following enough of the social conventions of framing so that they can understand your experience through the lens they're expecting it to see it, because that way it puts you on an equal footing with the other people they're having conversations with.
Right. Yeah. And I think part of that is bringing what you naturally do and who you naturally are into the context of this is what you need as the company. And, this is how I contribute to that. So even though it is kind of about you and, for example, maybe your way of working, right? You're relating it back to what they actually care about. So then it kind of works from both sides.
100%. And I actually even say for like interviews and networking conversations, it's not about you, it's about them.
Yeah.
Not literally, but but you've got to look at it from like, who are they? What do they care about? What does valuable look like to them? What's the language that they use? And how do we help, again, make that translation between what we do, what we've done, what, previously, the impacts that we've had, and what they actually care about? Because that's the translation piece that falls down for a lot of neurodivergent people.
Yeah, yeah. Anna, we could probably go on forever. But as we start to wrap up, tell us a little bit more about your coaching program.
The coaching program was born of my initial failure in the corporate environment and the steps that I figured out work to get neurodivergent women into roles that pay them well and align to their natural strengths. And so that's the process that we go through. We've touched on some of it today. It's very much, who am I? What's my natural brain wiring? What's my strengths? Where would I fit? Who would pay me well for what I'm going to do anyway? I may as well be paid well for it as opposed to irritate people by doing it. What are the skill sets I need to learn around that? And then how do I actually get that job? So we go all the way from framing up who I am, where I want to be, what's my options, all the way through to how do I talk about that How do I land interviews? How do I actually get offers? And how do I strategically job search? Because I don't know if you are aware of this, but at the moment, the statistics for applying for a job online is about a 2% chance of you getting that job, which is very low.
Yeah.
So we definitely want to be utilizing strategic job search. And, career coaches will be talking about the hidden job market and all of that stuff, which is important. And so we do that as well. The average time for my clients to get roles is probably about 12 weeks. And I do have some do it in as little as like 5 or 6.
Wow.
So
wow.
Super happy working in that environment, to be honest. I love seeing women step into their potential.
Yeah, that's amazing, because to put that into context, which I think a lot of people don't realize, at least here in the US, the average job search is 6 months. And from what I see with a lot of people who are unemployed, it can be even longer. So the fact that your clients are getting jobs in 12 weeks is amazing.
It sounds like a long time, but it's short.
Yes, that's my point. Thank you.
Yeah, that's also my point. Like, you might not be impressed by that, but you should be.
Yes. So if someone wants to learn more about your coaching program, where can they go?
I live on LinkedIn, fortunately or unfortunately. So that's definitely the best place to reach me. You can shoot me a DM and I'd be happy to connect with you.
Awesome. Do you have any last piece of advice, or maybe something that you find just doesn't work in the job search or career space for neurodivergence, and what they can maybe stop doing?
I think stop working on your weaknesses. If you're anything like me, you've been doing that your whole life. They're probably as good as they're going to get, more or less. Like, it's time now to double down on your strengths.
Yeah. Yeah.
And find places that are going to value those strengths, as opposed to endlessly trying to be better at the things that, let's be honest, we're never going to be that great at anyway.
Yeah.
You have the potential to be a top 1% somewhere, and it's not somewhere that's utilizing your weaknesses. So you want to be in about 80% of the time at your workplace, you need to be using your strengths.
I love that. Well, thank you so much for joining me, Anna. It has been a great conversation, and I'm sure it will be so valuable to everyone listening.
So thank you for having me, Melissa.
If you love this podcast, be sure to hit subscribe, leave me a review, and share it with a friend so we can help more high-performing misfits find work they love. See you next time.